to the front of the net. Puck work to the outside to Eklund. Howe back to Eklund again. Kerr sparring with Stevens in front. Eklund creeps behind. Out in front to Kerr. He scores! Tim Kerr and the Flyers are perfect on 5-on-3s. They are 3 for 3. Get their first power play goal of the night and tie the game.
Philly Sports Network and Wildfire Radio present the O&B Puckcast, episode number 48, and the shakeup has already begun. I'm here with my partners, Chef B. How are you, man?
Very good. Some cool, interesting news came out today. Can't wait to talk about it.
Cool. And of course, from Brotherly Puck and Brotherly Pod, Dan the Flyer fan. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's about 700 degrees in the studio, so I'm going to try not to die, but I'm doing good.
Yeah. Don't die. At least give us that last hour. So, listen, we have a special guest with us, and after that, Dan has a special announcement that he would like you to know about. But joining us for the first time on the O&B Puckcast anyway, is Radio Rob from the Always Next Year podcast. Rob, thanks for coming with us.
Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be on.
Great. Well, I tell you what, we couldn't have picked a better day to have the podcast. You know, for the Flyers, it's the off season, unfortunately, has already begun, but we got a whole slew of stuff to go through. National news, Flyers news, big shakeup, coaching staff. We got you covered tonight. So sit tight. Before we get started, Dan, you have an announcement. You have a new venture that you've announced. Why don't you just give us a quick breakdown of what you got going on?
Yeah, that's right. The Brotherly Puck brand is expanding. We are going national. There are two new sites, National Puck, which will cover all the teams across the league, and the National Podcast Network, which will feature podcasts from across the league covering all the teams. You can find them on Twitter at National Puck and at NationalPodNet.
Cool. Wow, that's great. That is fantastic. Congrats on that, and I'm sure you'll be keeping us up to date about all the events with that and where all these people are going to fit in with your new organization, your new venture. Okay, so Rob, I got to start with you here. The Flyers have really shaken up things with their coaching staff, and it has riled the fan base. Michel Therrien and Mike Yeo, both ex-head coaches that have a relationship with either Michelle, Chuck Fletcher or Elaine Vigneault, have been added as assistants. Let me see. Chuck Knobloch has been let go. And Wilson, Rick Wilson, has either gone back into retirement or was let go for whatever reason. Why don't you give us your initial impressions?
Well, when I first saw the update that they had brought in these two coaches, Mike Yeo and Michel Therrien, I had just gotten home from work, and I sat down and started eating my food. And I checked my phone, I checked Twitter, and I see that this all happened. I just about fell out of my chair. Like, I was completely taken aback by it. But so that was my initial reaction. Then I thought to myself, okay, this isn't so bad. Mike Yeo kind of up and down as a head coach. Like I said before we started recording, sometimes guys who aren't great head coaches end up being very good assistant coaches. So I'm interested to see what he can bring to the table there. Michel Therrien has kind of an up and down record as a head coach. Had some success in Pittsburgh before he got fired, and then Bilesma took him to a Stanley Cup that year. But I like the experience that he brings to the table, so I do like that hire, and I also like the fact that they went outside the organization. You know, they have such a tendency, or they have had such a tendency over the years to stay within the organization. I think it drove the fans nuts that they kept doing that. So the fact that they made that change, I think fans can be at least happy, if not a little bit excited about it.
Yeah, definitely can see where you're coming from. Dan, the Flyers also retained Adam Patterson, the video coach, and Kim Dillabaugh, the goalie coach. And Scott Gordon will be back as head coach in Lehigh Valley, moving Curry Huffman, who had taken over for him, back to his assistant coach duties. What's your take on what the Flyers did today?
I'm overall happy. It's a good move. I think personally, if I was building a team and had to build a coaching staff, I would find as much experience behind the bench as I could. And quite frankly, they did that. I'm not the biggest Mike Yao fan. And Michel Therrien has kind of had a spotty past in terms of, what he does in the room. But overall, I think it's going to be fine. And, I said the same thing when they hired Scott Gordon. I said the same thing when they hired Vigneault. I'm going to wait and see what happens before I make my predictions. So ask me again in, January how this whole thing's going, and then I'll give you my real answer.
Right. Yeah, I think the craziest thing that the part of this that upsets people the most, Chef, is the fact that Ian LaPerriere, for some reason, has found a way to stick around. I don't know if it's the French-Canadian thing with Vigneault and Therrien, or somebody. What's that?
Maybe he's got pictures of somebody.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Lappy, puck drunk Lappy, he sticks around, Chef, and that seemed to rile everybody up as much as all the negative info from the new guys.
Well, you know what? As both the guys have said already, you're bringing a lot of experience, and to play off of what Rob said, assistant coaches who are former head coaches tend to be a little bit better because they kind of anticipate what you want or what you need. More so, I see that happening more so in football than I do in hockey, but it's almost, I guess it can translate there too. But the thing that surprised me of everybody, I thought that maybe Knobloch might have a better chance with a better system. I don't know, but Lappy still being around it surprised the hell out of me. And I think Wilson retiring, I think that was expected. I think that was a quick fix as a favor for somebody, and it started to get better, but I don't know. I'm going to take the wait and see approach. I won't go as far as January, though. I'll say that we'll probably know what kind of team it is by the end of November. By Thanksgiving, we'll know what kind of team, or if they're quitting already, or if they, what Terrian's got a more of a disciplinarian role, I think, coming with this team, and I think that's what they need.
Yeah. The thing I keep coming back to, and I probably have said it like a mantra to the point of driving people crazy, this is the down 0-2 in 32 out of 82 bunch. And I just, they didn't come ready to play. Their details sucked. Their structure was awful. Their puck management, as a result, was awful. And I think this is why they have a strong defensive guy like Therrien, Mike Yeo, like you guys referred to. These guys, you don't get to even be a head coach unless you impressed as an assistant coach. So, yeah, I don't like a lot of these names in that regard. I don't get the Lappy thing. But I think this whole thing where they're down in games early and they're chasing the game more than 1/3 of the season, that's what they're taking square aim at. And I think that's what's behind a lot of this. Rob, any further thoughts?
I was just going to add another thing. I think that, they don't have a whole lot of veteran presence amongst the roster, in the locker room. So I think they're maybe trying to compensate for that by adding some veteran coaches. I think that could have a positive effect on them this year.
Yeah. I think the one aspect of this with Therrien, and the thing that came to light today, Danny Briere had an incident with Therrien when Briere played for him in Montreal, I believe it was. Dan, if you're familiar with this, where he called out Briere and said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, like, nobody respects you out there. And he went on and on about it. And Therrien is known to have bad relationships with some players, including PK, Subban, and all that. So, Dan, what's Is there something that's going to linger there, or is this a personality problem with Turian? Because, as an assistant coach, I don't think he's going to have that kind of leeway.
It's an interesting one. And I think, quite frankly, what this team needs is somebody that's going to be a little tougher on them. But, the exact quote here is, no one in the room respects you. No one wants to play with you. And at that point, Briere would have been, in his mid-late 30s. So, he was a well-respected vet at that point. So, who knows? I think this team does need some of that tough love. But, if it comes down to just pissing off the top guys and, having guys like Giroux not like anything, then that, that's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah. And Danny Briere is an ex-captain, I believe. So that's one of the nicest guys. And one thing I've always heard about Briere, Chef, is he's a guy that, the old expression in hockey, Danny cares. He's one of those guys that showed up all the time, giving his best. And I think Turian, in that particular case, is just picking on a guy whose fuel tank was empty by that point.
Yeah. I think he got a hold of him, I think, and everybody it happens to everybody. Even if maybe not everybody, but 95% of us are not going to have the same job when we retire from when we started. You know what I mean? Sometimes you run your course. And I think he caught him at the time where Briere needed a change. And maybe that was him trying to light a fire under him to get a response, get a play out of him, earn it, maybe step it up to the next level. Some coaches try to motivate like that. But that sounded a little bit desperate and a little bit maybe a little too nasty. I don't think it probably had the opposite effect at the time.
Yeah, and not only that, it's the fact that if you can criticize Danny Briere, who was Mr. Playoffs, I think the name of the book that he had put out as a French publication, French-Canadian, maybe Briere didn't get it. It was kind of like, let me criticize you, because if I criticize you, that will kind of mirror everybody else. I'm like, wow, he's getting on there, Briere. I better get my act together. But anyway, I think maybe we're blowing a little bit of this out of proportion. Look, this is Alain Vigneault's show, and he has had a pattern of having assistant coaches that have previous head coach experience on his staff. So I think he's following along with that. And like I said earlier, Turian is a good defensive structure guy, and it should really improve their puck management. The bottom line is they should not be chasing the games this year. I don't think, even though LaPerriere is here, and Rob, maybe give it your opinion, that he's going to be necessarily the PK guy. I think Michel Turian is really going to really cover most things defense, including breakouts and things like that.
I agree with you there. I think that he will cover most things defense. I think that that's his specialty, and that's an obvious area where the team needs to improve. So bringing in a veteran coach like him to shore something up, like the defense up, it makes sense to me. I could see him being that guy who, as you said, covers all things defense.
Yeah. I think that's where they're going with that. So we got a lot in front of us tonight in terms of trying to evaluate what the Flyers are going to do in what I consider their biggest offseason since, what was that, 06, 07? After they, yeah. And I think that's where they're at right now. And I think these moves, Dan, signal that the Flyers are gearing up. And the whole league, really, when you think about it, the whole league has had such volatility with really seismic shifts in important places with management and coaching changes. This will be a summer of change for the NHL and not just the Flyers.
Yeah, and I think especially with how these playoffs have played out, even I think some of these teams that were supposed to go all the way, and some of them have restricted players and things like that. I think it's going to be a very chaotic summer around the NHL, not just for the Flyers, and hopefully that these huge coaching changes do pay off in the end, and this signals that something is brewing big in changing the player personnel, because I think that's what's really going to matter the most for the Flyers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to head back to what the Flyers are going to do. I want to cover some league-wide news, and Rob was kind enough to pass along the news that Kyle Dubas had tweeted out that Mike Babcock will be back as the head coach of Toronto. And that was something that was speculated upon, Chef, that maybe his future was a little dicey. And then you combine that with Ken Holland leaving Detroit after Eisman had come from Tampa Bay. Holland now appears certain to go to Edmonton, and they're wondering about, well, who's going to coach Edmonton? Like I said, there are some seismic shifts throughout the league.
It is getting hard to keep track of where everybody's going for real, and then all the rumors and conjecture that's out there. I mean, like, it's so crazy. Just the stupid trade rumors that we've been hearing. I know it was horse hockey. You caught one in the wind yesterday, or it might have been earlier today. I don't know.
That was Twitter flatulence. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I mean, like, it's hard just to keep track of who's going to be going where and why. But I expect him to be, if Babcock goes there and he starts off with a poor showing again, he's not longing for the Leafs. I'm pretty sure the fans ain't longing for Babcock either.
No, I mean, I think Babcock had a reputation, and a lot of what started going wrong in Detroit was blamed on Ken Holland as they tried to extend their streak. What, they get 25 years or something like that straight in the playoffs, which the ownership pushed. Now we're seeing Babcock is stuck in some maybe old guard ways. Sheldon Keefe is a guy who's waiting in the wings, Rob. I agree with Chef. I think that Mike Babcock is on trial in Toronto and will be coaching for his job. They're going to have a set goal for him, and if he doesn't reach it, I think Dubas will be ready to make a change.
Absolutely. Toronto's they're a huge hockey market. They've been waiting so long for their Stanley Cup. They've had so many first-round disappointments in recent years, and now they have such a talented young team that they're ready. Like, this is it for them. And so this is going to be it for Babcock this upcoming season. This is going to be, as you said, the trial run for him. And while it's confirmed that he's going to be back next year, I think that if they don't at least make it to, say, the Eastern Conference Finals even next year, he could be on his way out because, as I said, they have such a talented team that they should be contending for a Stanley Cup. And the fact that they haven't even made it out of the first round during his tenure there, that's really put him on a short leash.
Yeah, I can see that. I think Dubas could have done a little bit more to help him on the defensive side. I mean, they did get Muzzin. That was I think a solid trade for them, but it appears as if they needed more. But like you're saying, maybe Babcock played a larger role in that than you would have thought based on Babcock's reputation. And Dan, Ken Holland is on his way out to Edmonton apparently, and he's going to have full authority. He's getting a 5-year contract at age 63 for a purported $25 million. I mean, that is going to be a crap show in terms of how he's going to try to offload some of the contracts and straighten things out, much in the manner that the Maple Leafs just did a few years ago.
Yeah, I don't think $25 million would be enough for me to take a job as the Edmonton GM right now. They are a hot mess, and they have a whole lot to figure out. I mean, they have McDavid and Draisaitl, and after that, there's a whole lot of nothing. So, yeah, he's got his work cut out for him, and hopefully he can, kind of make that team into something. But I don't expect them to be super competitive in the next at least year or two.
No, I think that they will be more notable for people watching them and see how they kind of get out of this Gordian knot that they're in with the salary cap and some of these lead weight contracts. So yeah, that will definitely be interesting. Chef, I wanted to hone in on something Elliot Friedman said. We talked about the last couple of shows, and I asked Dave Isaac about when Chuck Fletcher said, you don't just need one backup, you kind of need two veteran backups. So I'm listening to Elliot Friedman on his 31 Thoughts podcast, and he talked about how the league is moving towards needing 3 goalies now, not just 2, 3. And I'm thinking, okay, well, Mike McKenna just retired. So, but he would be like the model or the prototype for that third goalie who's not quite good enough to stick in the NHL, but you feel okay with him being around for 10 days. This seems to be a league-wide I guess,
Shift.
yeah, a shift or change or trend, what have you. And I'm wondering how the Flyers are going to negotiate this, because this is something that was particular from Chuck Fletcher.
Yeah. Well, we saw the goalie record we set this year, and you see around the league, like you just said, you do need that. I guess that 2.5 goalies, is that what, maybe not 3, but 2.5. Somebody that can come up, fill in the blanks here and there, because let's face it, you look at the difference between the games now and the games before is the goalies, the players are bigger, they're faster, they're coming down the ice, and it, I think we had mentioned it before in one show that the guys are so good anymore that they're spending more time in the opponent's zone, and they're getting, or maybe not so much more time, but they're getting more shots and quality shots, and they're peppering the goalies a hell of a lot more than we've seen in the past. And I think that with that comes those, flamboyant saves that we see going post to post, and injuries occur. And I really think it's smart now, especially for the Flyers. I mean, you have, two young ones coming over, and you want somebody that's kind of like can be a mentor to them. And, you're right, McKenna would have been probably our best option for that. I don't feel too happy about Lyon. I know Dan doesn't. Ugh. So they're kind of like in a little bit of a pickle here now too, because you got Hart, and then it's kind of like an open area for a backup still.
Yeah, I mean, with that decision is one of the ones we're going to get into that in terms of whether they're going to go with Elliott, Talbot, or option C. And that will be part of the calculus in terms of who they would want for that third goalie, perhaps. I mean, you think about the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, Rob, it looks like penciled in is going to be Felix Sandstrom. And then you have Kirill Ustimenko, who I guess would go to the ECHL. Alex Lyon's the guy now. And I'm trying to think, well, how did they get that McKenna type guy? Is that to supplant Alex Lyon for the benefit of the parent club? There seems to be a little bit of a jumble there.
I would say that it probably is for the benefit of the parent club. I mean, I don't really see what other value he would bring to the team. You did mention the 3 goalie thing. I think that would be what McKenna would be brought in for. So as far as the second goalie, I mean, they have a decision to make between Elliott and Talbot. I'm personally hoping that they go with Talbot just because I like him a lot better than I like Elliott. But for the third goalie, I could totally see them, bringing in McKenna for that.
Yeah, there's word that McKenna might be retiring, though, so we're really not sure. I haven't had an official announcement on that, so we'll have to pay attention. It could be that Fletcher might want to twist his arm for one more year if he could get some guarantees. But the thing is, think about this, Dan. If the Carolina Hurricanes, who are now in the Eastern Conference Finals, had not had an injury in goal, they would not have had Curtis McElhinney. McElhinney would have come to the Flyers. That might have changed the Flyers' whole season because he's a better goalie than Cal Pickard, and he was playing better than anybody, more or less, that the Flyers had at that time, as Elliott was coming back. He wasn't quite back yet. So it's just crazy how it works out. But I guess this is where Chuck Fletcher's coming from.
Yeah, I had Ron Hextall addressed the goaltending last summer. This would probably be a completely different story right now, but it's not. And, guys like McElhinney, who are, that kind of good backup third guy that you could go after, they're the kind of guys, they come cheap. He's making $850K. So he's not, not even $1 million. It's the kind of guys that, they don't always pop up, but there's plenty of guys out there that are in player systems, teams like Vancouver that have quite a few goaltending prospects, they can bear to move a guy or two. So it's just a matter of what they think of Alex Lyon moving forward. I think the fact that he was pretty much stapled to the Phantoms all season long says that they don't particularly see a whole lot in him, which is good because I don't see a lot in him either. But hopefully they find somebody this summer that can kind of swing that third man in case, Carter Hart or Talbot or Elliott, whoever plays backup, goes down.
Yeah. And Alex Lyon reminds me of Robert Ashe with like no talent.
Robert Ashe was the greatest. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, Robert Ashe, when he was off his game, he would lose his net, go kind of crazy, and but I'm saying with no talent. So, but there are sacred cows, Rob, that Dan has. And you got to be careful. Yes. Sam Moran, Robert Ashe.
Robert Ashe, Sam Moran, Eric Desjardins, and Peter Forsberg.
Oh, man. Robert Ashe was good for 1 year, 03-04.
Yeah.
Blasphemy.
Yeah. That Desjardins and Forsberg, that's easy. But Moran and Robert Ashe, I got to give you credit. Those are leaps of faith. Okay, so let's dig in. Chef, I'll let you digest your bread. Who's your backup choice? Let's assume this is a binary choice, and it's either Cam Talbot or Brian Elliott, and why?
Going with Talbot. He's more durable. I don't want to go into another season of worrying about if my backup goalie is going to be the man who gets hurt again. I don't want any goalie controversy or flipping around or nothing.
Okay, Rob, you weigh in.
I agree. I'm with Talbot. He's a little bit younger. He doesn't get hurt all the time like Elliott does. Elliott, it seems like just about every other week he's dealing with something. He's almost as bad as Michael Neuwirth was in terms of the injuries. I like what Talbot brings to the table more than I like what Elliott brings to the table. And plus the fact that Talbot in the past has trained with Carter Hart and they already have a little bit of chemistry there. They know each other. Cam Talbot can give him some pointers, help him out a little bit. That's why I would go with Cam Talbot over Brian Elliott.
Yeah, and both of those guys also have the same goalie coach that they consult in the offseason, Dustin Schwartz, who happens to be the goalie coach in Edmonton. Dan, why don't you weigh in?
Yeah, I'd probably pick Talbot as well. I like Elliott, and he definitely held his own this year, especially towards the end when Hart went down around the Stadium Series. But, it's just at a point where he's not reliable enough. I think he definitely has had his fair share of injuries over the past year or two. And, the playoffs last year coming back at, 50% after the surgery and then getting cleaned up again in the summer. So, yeah, I think Talbot is probably the better option of the two health-wise. I don't put a lot of weight into the last couple starts of his during the season because the whole team gave up at that point, and it was really not on him directly. Maybe a full off season rather, to train and prepare and come back and be the number two guy, without any distractions would be good for him. And he's friends with Carter Hart, so why not?
Yeah, I'm going to make it unanimous. I have a little bit of a different slant. I think Brian Elliott is definitely the better goaltender. But when you get the kind of injuries that he got in the groin, hip, all that's related, abdomen, you're just asking for trouble, especially at that age. So while he might not have had a history of those kind of injuries, if you get those kind of injuries at when you're 30, what is he, 34 now or something like that?
Yeah, 34, 35.
You're just asking for trouble. The other thing is, I think that Talbot will have an increased level of comfort playing for Vigneault like he did in the past. And I think Talbot also understands the backup role. I think wherever Elliott has gone, Elliott has always been a guy who thought, well, I'm going to get my 35, 45 games. Whereas Talbot's like, well, I got to be ready. I might only play 20 games. And I think he's better equipped mentally to be able to be effective in a more limited role. The downside would be if Hart has problems, if he has a sophomore slump, or God forbid he gets hurt, Elliott could probably handle and do a better job over an extended number of games. But all things considered, I'm going to go with Talbot. So we'll see what they do. That'll be very interesting. Hey, did anybody notice that weird video that the Flyers put out on Twitter? It was like a slow motion of Fletcher and Vigneault walking down the hallway to the press conference. And Vigneault had this weird look on his face. Did anybody catch that?
I must have been looking in the wrong places because I didn't see it. I actually searched for it, but I couldn't find it.
I believe I did. Yeah.
Tongue was hanging out a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's getting excited about being, wow, the Flyers, and like, it's just like a sexy blonde or something. It's like, Vigneault is Dan, Vigneault to me, and you guys can chime in when I'm done. Vigneault's like a different kind of cat. There's something kind of off about him. A lot of, he's more, I don't know. It's like he's like out of sync. But I'm not saying he's not a good coach. It's like just something personally. I don't know if it's off-putting. It's just a little different.
I think it's different because we're used to the robots we've had behind the coach for the past half decade. I think this guy has a little bit of a personality, a little bit of a little bit of an edge to him. So, I think having a little bit of life back there, however strange he is, I think is a step in the right direction, especially from, the Dave Haxtel's of the world that don't have a single emotion in their whole life.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about that. But if some point during the season next year you get a little weirded out by something AV does, we warned you. Anyway, so moving on. So one of the things about Vigneault, who I'll just call AV from time to time, I was reading Charlie O'Connor, and he was talking about when Vigneault was, interviewing for the job, that him and Chuck Fletcher had come to agreement with where the areas of need were for the Flyers. And two areas that came up, obviously, were the goaltending, the backup goaltending was obviously something. And one of the things that attracted him, Rob, was the fact that Carter Hart was in tow. But also, they seem to really emphasize the need for the center, particularly a second-line center. And Vigneault seemed to be excited about coming here because he thought if a couple of these holes were filled, that the Flyers could win sooner rather than later.
Right, and they have enough cap space to go out there and have a big off season and fill those holes, and plus they have the draft coming up. Whoever they draft probably won't be ready for at least 1 or 2 years, but they have a lot of opportunities to go ahead and fill those holes, and it's good to see that Fletcher and AV are seeing eye to eye on what the team needs because their needs are pretty glaring right now. They need some forward depth, especially at center. They need some depth on the defense, especially the second and third pairing there that they need to shore up. And they need to figure out who their backup goalie is. So it's really important for them to see eye to eye. And AV knows what he needs to be a good coach because he's done it for so long in this league. So the fact that Fletcher agrees on what the team's needs are to grow and become successful, that's an encouraging thing if you're a Flyers fan.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. If you look at the needs, we talked about it kind of ad nauseum. The backup goalie, obviously, we discussed. That decision will be made probably in short order. But again, trying to get that second line center, a veteran D-man, I think it has to be a top 3 level. They have to fill in some spots, Dan, with some penalty killers. Because, a lot of what made the PK better for the Flyers was increased ice time for Claude Giroux, but that's not the kind of ice time that we want him to get.
Yeah, and that really has been the bigger issue for the Flyers for quite a few years now is finding a way to help the penalty kill without using Couturier and Giroux. And, I don't like to pick apart, trades at this point because anything I say is just my guess and my guess only. So it's looking at the free agents. I mean, there are some names out there, but it really depends on how this team picks their forwards. If they're going to go, more land somebody big this summer, then you do Shane or Panarin or something like that, then, you can look at some AHL guys. Maybe somebody like Abe Kubel could come up and handle that role or Vecchione or whatever, whoever's down there can come up and handle it. But, I think that's going to be an interesting one to find this season. And looking at the list here, there's nobody that really sticks out as a bona fide penalty killer, but maybe finding a diamond in the rough besides a Boyd Gordon type could do them some good this year in terms of fixing the penalty kill, hopefully player wise, but again, who knows what these coaches are going to bring in from a system point of view.
Yeah and we can't forget that we have 2 defensive oriented players that have pro skill now in Vorobiev and German Rupsov. Rupsov, to me, has a higher upside, and that reflects his draft status. But they have to stay healthy, and the Vorobiev chef has to grow a spine, apparently, because when he gets with the big boys, he just seems to get a little timid.
He disappears. Yeah, he had plenty of time this past season to like solidify the fact that he could be up here. And I think we talked about it before too. I said when we were looking for people to fill roles, you got to make yourself valuable to the team. Where are you going to what do you bring to the table? And specifically what the team needed was people to kill penalties. And that's where you get your foot in the door there. If you're the guy that can kill the penalties, you can get your foot in the door and start saying to the coach, "Hey, notice me. Give me more shifts." But when he would get out there, he kind of like just faded in the background. It was more when he got the puck, you saw him, but it was more of what he didn't do away from the puck. He just kind of like floated. He didn't keep his skates moving. He kind of disappeared. If he could break out of that, I think he has a really good shot at help contributing to the Flyers if they can't fix their needs through free agency.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a big thing. I think they are going to pick off somebody through trade or free agency who will definitely help in that area, because they can't have Giroux doing that. If they're committed, and it sounds like Claude Giroux is really favoring staying at wing, which would be probably the smart way to go, then they're going to have to make some changes in that area, because it's easy for us to have all this fun talking about, well, they don't get Carlson, or maybe they'll get Skinner or Panarin, and I don't think the Flyers are favorites for any of those three, but if they could get some guys to backfill in the lineup, that could really have a salutary effect, no question. But, gentlemen, moving along, I'm watching these playoffs. Let's veer off a little bit with that. And, Rob, you think about what the bracket looks like right now in the NHL, and it's a complete shocker for everybody. This is like unanimous. So nobody can hold their head up proud and say, oh, well, I saw this coming. I mean, when you think about it, Eastern Conference tonight, of course, you have Columbus trying to stave off elimination by playing in Columbus tonight, playing Boston. Carolina's already in. That to me is like amazing. And then, of course, in the Western Conference, you have still unsettled. Tonight we have the Avs trying to stave off elimination by versus the Sharks, and then of course game number 7 between Dallas and St. Louis Blues. Your general impressions about what has gone down in these playoffs and what it might portend for other management groups in the league.
Oh, it's been crazy. It's really just a case of teams that came in lower in the standings, the lower half of the playoff seeding, just getting hot at the right time. I mean, Tampa had an incredible regular season, but Columbus, they were playing some decent hockey at the end of the season. They came in with a little bit of momentum, and they just absolutely smoked them in the first round. And now they're here playing Boston, trying to stave off elimination with a chance to force Game 7 tonight. Same deal with Colorado. Colorado went through a swoon in the middle of the season that really set them back, but they rallied towards the end. They made the playoff. In fact, they only had one more win than the Flyers did. They just got in because they had a whole bunch of pity points for the overtime losses. But they have a chance to force a Game 7 against San Jose tonight. And really the only two teams that are still in that you would expect to be this far are San Jose and Boston. And that really – it says a lot about, you want to have a talented team, but more so than anything, you want to have a team that gets it together at the right time and plays well in clutch situations. Tampa had a great regular season team, wasn't able to get it done in the playoffs. Same thing last year. They had a great regular season team that couldn't get it done against Washington in the conference finals. So really, when you're building a team, you want to look into what guys can bring when the games matter. And I think that a lot of GMs are going to start looking at that more than they're going to start looking at overall talent.
Yeah, I can see that. There's a couple of things that come to mind for me. that are either trends or a big surprise. To me, one of the biggest surprises was that the Carolina goaltending has held up. I mean, you talk about Mrazek, who I still don't believe it, and also McElhinney's older, the volume that he's had to play, the number of games, the whole thing, but just shows, Dan, the defensive structure in front of a goaltender, and this was proven with the Islanders, who reduced their number of goals against by 100 with Barry Trotz. This is where the coaching comes in, and the structure and systems and puck management make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, it's something that I saw a lot of Flyers fans talk about. Oh, it doesn't matter who's coach. They need to fix the players. And they do, but it definitely matters to the coach and the system. And I think this playoffs has been a prime example of that. Teams like Columbus and Islanders and Carolina, that are having, fairly decent coaching right now that are being able to take down the bigger teams in front of them. And it's because their system is so strong. And, the Islanders coasted on that all year. I mean, they were atop the Metro Division for most of the season until the very end when they got overtaken by the Capitals. So, it's a testament to coaching, and that it very is important. And again, I think that's why the hirings that they made today and over the past few weeks have been very important here.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. The second trend I see, Chef, is that what Jarmo Kekalainen was able to do in Columbus. Now, there's a market that needed a playoff series victory, and they got it finally. And they're very, very competitive. They played on balance as well as Boston. I think just the cream's kind of rising to the top in that series, with Boston having a lot of guys that have playoff and championship experience. But what I'm really referring to is the fact that Jarmo was willing to push all the chips in the middle of the table and gamble, knowing he's probably going to lose Bob in net and Panarin. But he goes out and gets Duchesne and Dzingel. And I think he's been rewarded, and I think his moves were justified.
Oh, absolutely. When it was trade deadline day, and I saw everything going, all the moves that were being made, I looked at CBJ and I went, "Oh my gosh, these guys are like all in." And then we were either I was watching it or I can't remember exactly where I saw it. There was a rumor or a statement that Panarin was very happy with the fact that the team went all in and give this team a shot. And I thought it was great. It's great. You could tell. I mean, I kind of took this might be off subject, but I took a brief look at all the hockey attendance for all the teams across the league. And, aside from the big markets, like, it's nice to see that Columbus was somewhere right in around the middle. That showed to me that they were kind of like a hockey town, and they're getting their reward now. They're getting their present, so to speak, for being loyal fans. And they deserve it.
Yeah, I hope it goes to Game 7. I really do. I thought Columbus played very well. I thought Colorado has played very well against San Jose. But, Rob, I think, is this San Jose, as they're more or less presently constituted and as they've had this decade-long run, do you think this is really their last kick at the can?
Yeah. I mean, their players are getting up there in age, so yes. Joe Thornton, he's just about done. Pavelski, towards the end, and now with the injury, he might be seeing his last days as an effective hockey player. They've got a lot of guys. They've got some young players, don't get me wrong, but they've got a lot of veteran players who are getting up there and aren't going to be nearly as effective in the future. So I think this is their last hurrah, and there's a chance that they might lose Carlson, that he might not be back next year. So they're going for broke here. They're absolutely going all out to win a Stanley Cup and get those guys, Pavelski and Thornton, a ring while they have a chance, because their future after this might be pretty bleak.
Martin Jones has been amazing, though. He stood on his head, especially last game. He came up with at least 3 really, really big saves. I've been following this. I've always been a closet San Jose fan, and they've been this series, the last 2 series, as a matter of fact, have been some of the most fun hockey I've ever watched.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming with Martin Jones. He had a horrible regular season. It was like 894 save percentage or something crazy. So, but look, he showed up like he did a few years ago when they went to the finals, and he's been a positive factor. And for that matter, Grubauer from Colorado. I actually picked Colorado because I thought Vegas, Dan, I thought Vegas outplayed San Jose most of that series and might have been kind of worn out. In Colorado, when they have their moments, I'll tell you, the Avalanche, they add a little talent. Man, they're going to be a really good team.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously have the Avalanche have that one line that's been doing a vast majority of the damage, but they got a couple defensemen now that are coming along, and some of the other teams when they can get it, the other players when they can get it, the scoring is good. So when they're on, they're on. I as far as Vegas goes, I had them winning the cup, and they obviously fell apart in Game 7 there after trying to kill Joe Pavelski. So
that's not the only one.
Yeah, I had them going on the way, and Carolina. I've been a Hurricanes fan since I was a little kid, much to my parents' dismay, and then I eventually jumped on the Flyers and have been chained to this train for life now. But it is nice to see that they're coming around. So it has been just an absolutely crazy playoffs from just all over the league at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy. I just got a letter. Well, we might as well a tweet from Saravalli answering a crazy rumor that was out there, something like Couturier for Ryan Johansson, and he puts out here, Frank Saravalli, this is absolute fake news. I haven't said or written or thought. He put in parentheses, one word on Johansson, Couturier, or anything Flyers or Preds. Just an FYI. So there you go. And he put the name. He added the guy and said, take this hot garbage off or something like that. So, but I wasn't going to dignify that clickbait. But I got some mileage out myself, to be honest. But yeah, take this hot garbage down. Right, that's what he put. So I was
Coots isn't going anywhere.
No, it was just pure unadulterated crap. But before we are going to get in a couple of trade suggestions, rumors, things like that, because we're going to turn this thing back toward the Flyers. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the draft. We're going to have a draft show, and so we're not going to talk about names and things like that. I know I went on Rob's show, podcast. Rob, what's your hockey part of the Always Next Year podcast?
We call it, it's a segment called Who the Puck is Ryan Dingle, and the name came about because we were talking about the Chris Pronger trade that the Flyers made all the way back in before the 2009-2010 season. And one of our guys on the show, Steve, one of the guys involved in the trade was a guy named Ryan Dingle. Came to the Flyers, never played for him. I don't think he did anything in the NHL really after that. But we're talking about it, and Steve's talking about how he heard the trade, and his first thought was, who the F is Ryan Dingle? So that's how that name came about there.
Right. And a lot of people put a hyphen on there and, put Burry after that. So that probably was his greatest claim to fame. But Dingle, Burry. Okay. All right, now moving on. So we're not going to go through the draft. That was bad. But we're not going to go through the draft names or anything like that. But I did want to talk about the draft in terms of, Dan, I don't think the Flyers are going to keep this pick. I think it's going to be part of some of their off-season activity. And also just piggybacking that, if you look at the Flyers' top 3 prospects, and in no particular order, Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost, Isaac Ratcliffe, okay? I think most people would give that as a consensus as their top 3 guys. I think it's also possible that one of those 3 could be traded as part of a move to get some of the needs that we're going to talk about momentarily. Dan, your comments.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really see a reason to keep the 11th overall pick. I know a lot of the prospect guy, oh, we need it. We need prospects. But, it's time to stop playing that game, and it's time to make some things happen at the NHL level. And, at this point, I would keep Frost and Farabee, and, everybody else, including the 11th pick, should be, on the market and thrown out there and see what they can get for him. It's time to stop playing games, and it's time to get this team going, and you're going to have to sacrifice a draft pick here or there to make a trade anyway, whether it be now or at the trade deadline to get better. So, I think building a team, they need to start doing that now and stop worrying about what's going to happen in 10 years from now.
Yeah. And Rob, let me just circle back to Elliot Friedman's comments, what I referred to earlier. One of the couple of other things that he said is that the Flyers definitely want to be big players in the offseason. And when someone talked about Shane Gostisbehere as a trade chip, he kind of said that Ghost, his name's been out there before anyway.
Yeah, Ghost, I mean, I think that he's had a few seasons in the NHL. He's kind of been up and down. Last year was not his greatest year. I think that I don't want to say that the front office is growing impatient with him, but I think that they want to, find somebody who can be a little bit more sound defensively. And Ghost, he's a great guy on the power play. He's a great blue line guy on the power play. Offensively, he's a very, very solid offensive defenseman, but defensively, he has been very inconsistent. He gets caught a lot out of position, bad turnovers, gets beat, an odd man rushes going the other way. And I think that's something that's concerning to the Flyers. And if it's something that he doesn't improve on, he might be on his way out.
I think his name's been out there because he's had problems with 3 coaches that he's worked under. And he seems to always go back to this thing, Chef, where he says, well, I just stopped listening and started playing the way I'm capable of, or something to that effect. Like he just had to play do the things that he's good at, or something to that, in that regard.
It went back to it's the same old, same old. Look, the only reason in my mind to keep him around, he can be part of that bargaining chip. I do believe. I mean, like he's got a very cap friendly contract and long term, and that's okay. That can be one reason to keep him around. But if you move him with that pick, and then you free up some money, I think there's no reason. I think Dan had tweeted it out at one point that how the way Carlson was playing in these playoffs, he would look really good in the Flyers sweater, right? Was that you, Dan?
Probably.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, that's not out of the realm of possibility. If you move that, you get the pick, you address some needs. I think that definitely can do that. And, as far as we were talking about the big 3 prospects, I just thought of all of them that, we all talked about, like who could be ready or whatever. The only one I see that is even physically ready is Ratcliffe, Big Rat. I just think that, if he continues to play the way he's played in the playoffs in OHL and his past career, I think he might be the one that makes his team out of camp if anybody does.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that could also be the reason why he's dealt as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. All right, so let's dig in. Let's talk about what the Flyers have to do. They have between 32 and $35 million in cap space right now before they have to pay their restricted free agents. And some of that variance involves a decision whether or not they're going to buy out Andrew McDonald. I'd recommend at this point it's time. The Flyers need a minute-munching defenseman. It's kind of the reason why that Ghost could be available, because they're wearing Provorov into a thimble there, and I think that's one of the considerations. Now, after they pay the restricted free agents, which include who? Provorov, Konechny, Sanheim, Lawton,
Hartman and Bailey.
Hartman, okay, yeah, and Bailey's, it's just based on the way he plays. So let's assume they have between $14 and $17 million left over after that, roughly. So then we go and we look at the marketplace. The trades, you can speculate where people are going to go. The early word I'm getting here, according to the fourth period guys, and we had them on a few shows ago, Duchesne, the early prediction is that he would go to Nashville. The Islanders might seek out Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in a trade. Again, this is via the fourth period, Dave Pagnotta, Dennis Bernstein. And as we know, it's all speculation. It seems like the top free agents, unrestricted free agents, would be Carlson, Panarin, Skinner, probably Hayes as well, the center. Rob, do you care to speculate on who the Flyers, A, who they would target, and B, who they have a realistic shot to get?
Well, I think they're going to target Panarin. I think that I'm not sure that they're fully sold on trying to target Carlson. I wouldn't be surprised if they do. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't either way. I think they're absolutely going to go after Panarin. And if they figure out that they're not going to get him, I wouldn't be surprised if they go hard after Skinner. I think either one of those guys could fit in well here. We need a goal scorer. We need a guy who can put up the points offensively. And as I said before, we need forward depth. And both of those guys could provide all of that. So I think either one of them would fit in really well with the Flyers and fit in well with AV's style of play as well. So I think they're going to go hard for either one of those guys. And I think that Panarin is going to be the top choice there.
Okay, yeah. Would you say, Rob, that speaking of Vigneault and his style of play, that it reminds you a little bit of Laviolette in some ways, in terms of at least in terms of pacing, playing fast, and wanting to keep moving the puck out of the zone as quickly as possible? More or less, outlet passing is more important than rushing defensemen in that regard.
I think it just about mirrors it. I mean, there are some minor differences, but having watched Laviolette, the teams that played under him for all those years that he was here, and then obviously watching those teams play against Vigneault's teams when Vigneault was coaching the Rangers, they had a really similar style of play. And the Rangers just so happened to always get the better of the Flyers in those games. But yeah, I see a lot of similarities there, and I think that could be beneficial to the team.
And that, leads me, Dan, to a discussion of maybe a little bit of a controversial pursuit that the Flyers could have of somebody like Kevin Hayes, who I mentioned earlier. He's a big, tough guy to play against, and that comes right from the horse's mouth. The Flyers actually were asked by reporters on trade deadline day who got moved, and Kevin Hayes was moved early on, if I recall correctly, and the Flyers were saying, wow, well, he's really tough to play against. But he's a 50 to 55 point guy. But do you want to be locked into a guy who seems to have kind of a little bit lower ceiling for about 5 or 6 years? Or do you think that he's good enough and Patrick could supplant him through natural development?
And I think that's kind of the more interesting question about how they go about their search for a center this year is you ideally want somebody that, if necessary, could be stationed at the third line and let Patrick step up, but you need somebody in the short term that can play second line. And Hayes is an interesting guy. He would certainly not be my first choice. I see a lot of people go, oh, well, he has experience under Vigneault, so they have to bring him in. And, I'm not a fan of reassembling past teams for their coaches. The whole point of going outside the organization for coaches was to, avoid this mess. So, he wouldn't be my first choice, but, I get the type of player that he is, I think is somebody interesting, again, to kind of help Nolan Patrick, can swing at that second or third line role given what he needs at the time.
What about Brock Nelson type cat,
Brock Nelson. He's a little bit older. Yeah, he's the kind of guy I would want to look at his stats and really drill that down because
25 goals and 53 points this season.
Not bad. He's 27 years old.
27, yeah. Looks like he's putting up about 20 goals to 25, depending on the year, about 50 points, more or less. 45 to 50 points. So, he'd be an interesting kind of guy that, again, much like I was just talking about, where you can kind of play him in either role, the second or third line. But It's an interesting one. If they're going to miss out on a top guy, you have to look at these guys that can play that transition. But again, I would much rather get a top guy and pay a little more. But who knows at this point? It really is depending on, where the guys like Panarin and Duchesne and these guys end up.
Overall, I think if you look at, the free agents this year and what's out there, it's a lot of old crop in that mix as well. So you're going to, there's not too many picks out there. I think no matter what you get, you're definitely going to be overpaying this year.
That was the thing I noticed more than anything is looking at the names of the free agents. Like, they're all 34, 35 years old. It's like, man.
Thornton,
yeah. The defensemen are just the same.
Justin Williams, 37.
Yeah. Just back with Brock Nelson real fast. I wanted to do a little bit of the more advanced metrics on him. They're really not great. He did have a majority, like 55% defensive zone starts. So, and it's not a high-scoring team, so he did score pretty well. To get 25 goals with that many defensive zone starts, and at least in terms of percentage, is pretty impressive. But if you look at like possession quality and stuff like that, this is really the first year it's come to fore and been impressive, because in the past it's been a freaking disaster. So it depends on whether the structure made the player or vice versa. So it's a cautionary tale with Brock Nelson, but I guess he would be a dark horse candidate for somebody the Flyers could pursue. One thing, Rob, Sam Carchidi puts out an article, and without regard to what the Nashville Predators might need too much in terms of not so much in terms of type of player, but also salary cap realities. He says, well, why don't we trade Jake Voracek for PK Subban? And PK's got, 3 years left at like 9.5 or something like that?
Yeah.
And, okay, well, PK's looks like a guy who's maybe leaking oil a little bit, but just how did that hit you in terms of what the Flyers would be losing and what they would be gaining?
I mean, it's certainly an ambitious idea, and both guys have big cap hits. Both guys have had success in the NHL. Voracek has put up some big numbers offensively. So has Subban, and Subban not quite as good defensively as he once was. I think that the Flyers are looking to improve defensively, and Subban could hypothetically still bring that improvement that they're looking for, but at the cost of giving up Voracek, who, you can count on Voracek for 65, 70, 75 points a season. Yes, he does have a big cap hit, but he's been pretty consistent in putting up the offensive totals, even on some teams that really haven't been super talented offensively. So I think that deal, as a Flyers fan, I would not 100% be in favor of that.
Yeah, I see some holes in the presentation that Sam gave, and Sam's like the nicest guy in the world. He did me a solid one time on a health related matter, so I always have a soft spot for Sam. The thing is that Nashville has their own issues. Why would they trade PK? Because they have to pay Roman Josi, Dan, a boatload of money. We're talking probably maybe 10, 11 million in that range. And I have heard from some people I trust that it might be actually Josi that gets moved along. And I perked right up on that. Roman Josi's one of the top 10 defensemen in the whole league, in my humble opinion. But what say you?
I have not heard that, but that would be certainly the guy that I would target more than anything. But, kind of circling back to the Voracek for Subban deal, that's an interesting one. I think Subban is kind of starting to, slow down a little bit. He only put up like 30 points this year compared to his usual, 50. So I believe he's 29. So, he is kind of getting to that, twilight of his career where he's going to start to decline. But it's an interesting guy. I think in the right situation, he can still be a top guy. And, you're going to get rid of Voracek, who's still got some time on his deal. You're paying him about the same. And it gives you, in the short term, it gives you a top defenseman to kind of take some of the weight off of Provorov, and you don't have to force it all on Sandem and Myers, but it won't be a long-term deal like you would need to sign Erik Karlsson to, who's going to be a free agent. It'll probably be 3-4 years less than what you would need to sign him to. So, it was an interesting deal. I saw that, and I definitely didn't hate the idea. I think it could be an interesting move for both teams. I don't know, if it's based on any kind of reality or not, as well as the Roman Josi stuff. But, that's certainly two guys that I would be interested in targeting this summer.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Subban, look, he's the same age as Voracek. And I've heard really good things about Subban in terms of his conditioning and all, but he had a back injury this year, and I'm wondering, I'd want to know a heck of a lot about it, because the underlying metrics on Subban appear to indicate that he could be in on the backside of his career, and he could be starting a downturn. But before we wrap this up, it's been so chock full of info tonight. I hope you're enjoying it, because we sure are enjoying it ourselves, bringing it to you. Another big subject, Chef, has been the restricted free agents and the offer sheets. Now, I think there's a tier at which if you pay a player, what is it? $10.5 million? Is that the breaking point?
Yeah, I think it's a little over 10.5.
Yeah. Then as compensation, you have to give up 4 number 1 picks. That is a crap ton of compensation, and that can sink a franchise if you get it wrong. And you have to remember, when people talk about Mitch Marner and Braden Point, those players have to want to come to your team. They have to put their name on the offer sheet. So you can say, oh, we'll just offer sheet this guy. No, you can't. He has to sign it. And they have to want to come here, and it can be matched. And if it is not matched, 4 number 1 picks is a lot. And Chef, I'm thinking maybe below that tier, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the next tier down would be a first, a second, and a third for compensation. If I have that right.
I believe so.
Maybe.
Sounds right.
Yeah, maybe a player like William Karlsson, who I don't think Vegas would let go of, but he's not a $10 million player. But coming off of seasons of 43 and 25 goals, really good defensively, metrics are like fantastic, skates. He'd be so ideal here in Philadelphia. Now he's a guy I would take a chance and maybe overpay a little bit, because I think he's only 26.
No, 29.
Well, William Karlsson?
Oh, I'm thinking Erik Karlsson. Never mind. Yeah, William Karlsson. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say they need to go for it. I mean, the fans know that they're not dumb. That you're a couple pieces away from being a very competitive team, and hopefully with the coaching and going for it and trying to get that Karlsson or that dynamic player, you got a chance of making the play.
Yeah, well, I think I tweeted out earlier, like, if you think about what happened on Long Island, and obviously subsequent to that with Carolina, if your structure is good and you improve in those areas, that could be like 5 to 7 wins right there from that alone. I mean, you don't have to chase the game. I mean, the competitiveness that a team has, and this team had a lot of quit in it, and it harkens back to the very beginning of the show. Why did the Flyers get all these veteran guys in on the coaching staff? But yeah, getting back to the RFA picture, I think that's probably as good as it's going to get. The only other thing I could think of, Rob, would be a situation where you go to Toronto, and I've talked about this earlier, and they're kind of targeting Kapanen, and maybe you could say, listen, we got his name on an offer sheet, but let's work out a trade. Because not every offer sheet, it ends up with that being accepted. Sometimes it ends up just being a trade.
If the Flyers somehow end up with Kasperi Kapanen, if he ends up being anything like his father, he'll be my favorite player on the team easily. So I would certainly be in favor of, going after Kasperi Kapanen. Depends on the price. If they try to work it out via trade, then Toronto, their chances are they're going to ask for a little bit more than the Flyers are willing to give away. But if it ends up that Kasperi Kapanen is going to be signing somewhere as a free agent, then Why not? Take a run at him. He's going to ask for at least seven figures this year. He came in at 863 last year, so he's certainly going to be asking for a bigger contract. But I think that he's a young player. He's 23 years old. Put up 20 goals, 24 assists last year. He's only going to get better. Why not? I would absolutely 100% be in favor of the Flyers bringing in Kasperi Kapanen.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the player. I think I see some of this bothering him, but I still think he's in his formative stage at only 22, like you said. And some of the other, there were some possibilities. They're going to have to pay Marner. They're going to have to pay him Matthews money. So I think that Matthews is 11.6. I think Marner's going to be right there. Then you have three $11 million players. So somewhere along the line, and they need a defenseman, so that's another trade that they can make. So they're going to either let go of a Kapanen, Andreas Janssen, or, of course, there's William Nylander, who could also be moved, Nazem Kadri, who ticked everybody off. These are some players I think the Flyers should be looking at. Dan, how would you feel about a controversial guy, almost like a Marchand-like character almost, in Nazem Kadri coming to the Flyers and filling that second center hole?
Those are kind of guys that they're not nearly as bad when they're on your team as they are when you're facing them. Looking up his stats here to get a better picture, but yeah, I wouldn't mind it. Again, I think that Toronto's probably going to be one of those teams that you're going to be able to prey on this summer, one way or another, whether it's, a Marner or an Andreas Janssen or something like that. So it is possible. He doesn't look like he's putting up huge numbers, so I don't know if I would get him specifically. I don't know if he plays a ton of penalty kill time either, maybe for more of a bottom six role. But yeah, whether it's Kapanen or, one of the bigger fish in Marner, they're in an interesting situation cap-wise, and they have a whole lot of, as we see in this playoffs, they have a whole lot of things to fix yet. So they're going to be, they're in a bit of an interesting situation, and I'm sure whether it's the Flyers or some other team, they are going to be prime targets to have some players picked from their roster.
Yeah, and I would be looking at them. I'd be looking at Winnipeg. Rob, Winnipeg is another place where it could be fertile ground, because that is a really competitive division. There are big expectations with that team, and rightfully so. You look at a guy like Trouba, who we talked about on our last show, and even Matthew Perreault, who he has a no-trade clause, but I mean he could help their depth. There's a lot out there. That's why I think this is going to be such a compelling offseason.
Absolutely. Winnipeg, and just like Toronto, they have a lot that can be picked from them. You mentioned Perreault, you mentioned True, but they also have Andrew Kopp, who's an RFA, and at 25 years old, he didn't put up gaudy offensive stats last year. He only had 25 points in 69 games, but he's a guy who's got some experience. He's played in a lot of big games before, and he's a guy who could also get some attention from a lot of teams around the league. But Perreault is a guy who I think the Flyers should really look into. And obviously I would love to have Trouba on the team. So the Flyers are going to do their due diligence there. At least I think they should. And if I had to pick anybody from Winnipeg that would be a Flyer next year, is most likely to be a Flyer next year, I think it would be Matthew Perreault.
Yeah, I think Matthew Perreault is the kind of guy who's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And the Flyers could use a guy like that. They kind of have Michael Raffl, but Michael Raffl's not really a center. I think he played there for a couple games or a couple times. But Matthew Perreault comes in, a lot of experience. He's not real flashy, but again, if he could take some of those hard minutes away, that would be a good thing. I'm not sure if he has played on PK or not. That would definitely be another selling point in his favor, referencing back to our comments with Giroux and our concerns there. Obviously, the Minnesota Wild, and a lot of discussion about Jared Spurgeon, is Shep, a defenseman who was found, one of those apple of my eye kind of players for Chuck Fletcher. He's a defenseman we talked about last couple shows, 29, right-handed defenseman, last year of the contract coming up this year. He's like a 2-3 guy. He could function on a top pair with a guy like Provorov, and he can take hard minutes. He can play in all situations, unlike a guy like Ghost, who's instant offense, but the Flyers need more attention on the defensive side of the puck. I don't know what it would cost to obtain him. I don't know if he's even going to be available. But again, there's so much out there for the Flyers to chase down in terms of targets.
There's a lot to pick from, and I think you gotta step back and really like address what you need, and not like go crazy. I mean, like it's like when we were kids and you would like get the wish book at Christmas, the Sears catalog, and you'd be like, oh, you look it through. I want that, I want that, I want that, and then the reality is you can't have all that, and you end up getting something you think is great, but it's not what you need. And I think the Flyers got to be very, very smart about that, and look at it from like try to get what you can to fix the defense first, because we talked about working the way up. They got a goalie. We know they got a goalie. And whether they have a backup, that's debatable, but there are definite options within the organization to fix that, or a free agent, or, whatever. And then you work at the defense now, because we know that from other systems that we've seen throughout the league, that if you can cut down on the workload that he's facing, you will only improve the overall scores of your game and the play of your game. So I think that the number one thing is if they go with the defense and keep that as their primary focus, I think they'll definitely have a better chance of success this year.
Yeah, I think that's an area that they have to concentrate. It's exciting to talk about guys like Panarin. We're certainly not going to turn him down if he'd actually put his name on a contract. But the concentration, and it seems to be backed up by the coaching hires today, seems to be on the defensive side of puck for sure. But there's all kinds of names. We could be here all night. We don't want to do that, just teasing you with names. But just some other players that really could fit in with the Flyers that you might hear them inquiring about. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is on the radar. He'd definitely be a second-line center. His metrics aren't great, Rob, but the profile of the player and the fact that he's improving in such a dumpster fire of a situation, I could see him coming to Philadelphia and fitting in quite nicely with some skill that translates on the power play, not just a defensive center.
I could see that. RNH is a nice player. Obviously, he didn't end up being what was expected of him as a top draft pick out there in Edmonton, but he's got a lot of talent, and he can do a lot of things well if he's in the right system. And I think that Vigneault's system, as I said with a couple other players before, Vigneault's system could fit him well. And if it does, I think that'll bring out the best in Nugent-Hopkins. So that's an interesting player to look into. Another guy that I actually had on my radar, and this is, Washington's going to do everything they can to bring him back. But if that doesn't happen, Jakub Vrana is definitely a player that the Flyers should look at. He put up 24 goals, 47 points last year. He's a young guy too. He's 23 years old. He has a lot of room to grow. From what I've seen to him, what he's done against the Flyers over the course of the years, he's a very talented player, and he's another guy who would fit in with Vigneault's system. So either one of those guys, if the Flyers end up getting them, it would be a definite improvement.
Yeah, I like Vrana. He's one of those below the radar guys that you always notice out there, and maybe even Dmitry Orlov, who wasn't quite as good as he was last year. But again, it's about identifying players that fit a role that could fit in with the Flyers and maybe actually prosper from the change. People talk about how long it took, referring back to RNH, it took for Couturier to find a certain part of his game. That could be the case with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, especially considering his skill package is more translatable offensively than Couturier, who kind of found he could only score in certain areas of the ice. So, like the smart guy that he is, he can just consistently gets in those areas to score. So, it's going to be a fascinating offseason. And, one thing, gentlemen, before we wrap up tonight, I've noticed that the division competitors right now all seem to have an ace up their sleeve. whether it's proven playoff success with Washington and Pittsburgh, lottery luck like Jersey getting Hischier and now looks like almost certainly Jack Hughes, or a well-planned rebuild and an ideal location with the Rangers, who have done a masterful job and look like they're going to be ready to take off in a couple years. And now they're probably going to get Kako at least. I mean, Chuck Fletcher, even with the cupboard loaded with the prospects and potential here, and as Carter Hart starts his career, Dan, Chuck Fletcher has got to hit a grand slam, not just a home run.
Yeah, I've talked about this on my show a whole lot. The one thing we cannot do is sit here in October and go, have a Ron Hextall kind of summer of, well, nothing seemed right and we didn't add anybody because it wasn't the right fit. It can't happen this year. It can't. They need to go out there and they need to make a move and make a couple big moves. None of this Boyd Gordon stuff to come in and this guy's going to fix the penalty kill and then he plays with the Phantoms all season. You just can't do that anymore. There's no excuses. You're rebuilding this whole coaching staff. They need to go out and rebuild the whole players too. And they need to bring in a couple big names or a couple effective names. How about that? That's an even better way to put it. And, hopefully they legit find some diamonds here that they can build around because they need some help. You talked about New Jersey and the Rangers look like they are, primed for a turnaround, especially the Rangers, and, Pittsburgh and Washington are still kicking, and, the Islanders clearly can get some stuff done. If they had a big piece this year, they could be dangerous. So the Flyers need to find an identity, and they need to find it quick.
Yep, an identity. Boy, is that boy. This team has had none. Well, I don't know. Ever since they made the Carter Richards trades and they spit out that stupid mantra, well, bigger, faster, stronger. Okay, thanks, Homer.
Yeah.
I don't know what that meant then. I don't know. I mean, not that they won the transactions, but ultimately they lost them, if you know what I'm saying, because they went nowhere with that. And, gents, let's wrap up with some final thoughts. Rob, thanks so much for coming by. Your contributions have been invaluable, like we thought they would be. Anything that we might be still on your mind or you want people to know about?
Well, first off, one thing that we were talking about Vigneault earlier on, I don't want to go all the way back, but one thing that I noticed that I was really impressed about is his record. It was in trying to figure out who wrote the article here. It was in Meltzer's article. He brought up the statistics from year to year for Vigneault. His record when the team scored first was ridiculous, and his record when they gave up the first goal was better than just about any other team out there. So that tells me that Alain Vigneault's teams throughout the course of his career, they have played better as the game has gone along. I mean, he had seasons where his teams won 50 games, and yet they gave up the first goal more often than not. So the fact that was the case and they were able to have as much success as they did, as Flyers fans, we're used to seeing a team not put together a full 60, and they'll come out strong for a period and a half, 2 periods, and then completely fall apart after that. So I'm encouraged by the fact that Vigneault's teams have a tendency to play better as it seems as the game goes along, and that's something that I'll be looking forward to this upcoming season.
Terrific. Yeah, that's a very good point. These are all areas that the Flyers have been weak, probably going back to the Laviolette days. And, we pointed to those moments. I mean, Lavi was done here when he left, but really that was the last time the franchise, thinking back, really had it all together and had a positive direction. And then once Holmgren squandered all those assets, we all know what took place from there on in. Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit about where people can find you on Twitter, and a little bit about your Always Next Year podcast. It's a unique concept. Maybe explain that for some people who haven't heard about it.
Well, the Always Next Year podcast is actually a network of podcasts, a kind of umbrella deal. We have a podcast called Who the Puck is Ryan Dingle, the one that I'm a host of that covers the Flyers. We have an Eagles podcast called the Kelly Green Hour. We have a Sixers podcast called TJ's One of Us. And we have a Phillies show called In Cap We Trust. And maybe I'm missing one or two in there, but those are the names of our team-related segments that we have. Sometimes we'll throw in some fun segments. But yeah, we've been going at it for over a year now, and I was brought in after Shane and LJ and Steve had already created the podcast. They're the three, I guess you would say, founders of it, and then they brought me in after that. But yeah, it's a great show, and you can find us on Twitter at ANY Podcast. You can also find us on Spotify, on iTunes, on pretty much any streaming service. We're on there, so that's where you can download and listen to our segments. And yeah, you can find us, as I said, at ANY Podcast on Twitter. You can find me personally at radio_Rob.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks again so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be on the show.
Terrific. Dan, as many podcasts as Rob has, he still has a way to go to catch up to you. So why don't you give us your information as capsule analysis as you can?
We warm up here. You can find me on Twitter at Dan the Flyer Fan, at Brotherly Puck, at National Puck, at National Podnet, and what's the other one? Is that all of them? Oh, at Heart Countdown, if you want to count down Card Arts wins with me, even though it's the middle of the off season. But yeah, my Angry and Negative show will be back on Thursday night as we break down the second round of the playoffs and make predictions for the third, because this has gone swimmingly thus far. So we're going to try it one more time. Yeah, looks like BPW Radio will be back next week, Wednesday, Thursday as well. So stay tuned for that at Brotherly_Pod.
All right. Thank you, Dan, so much for your contributions. And Chef, let's close this out. Where can people find you on Twitter, and what do you got for
them? Chef to the Left B at Twitter, and you can find me at Steam Pubs in Southampton, PA. You come in, mention me, ask for me. If I'm there, you get a discount, 25% off the check. Why not?
Excellent, excellent. And Steam Pub, where can you find Steam Pub?
606 2nd Street Pike, Southampton, PA, in Bucks County.
And that's 18966, is that correct? So, yeah, well, I used to have zip codes. I was a pharmaceutical rep. We knew our zip codes. Anyway.
You know what, Dan? Just for Dan now, we'll just say this. Your predictions, they might not mean a lot of stuff, because everybody played that bracket thing, and the brackets are shot to hell, baby.
Yeah.
Everybody's bracket is busted. So I'm Isaiah. You can find me, Isaiah, ISAIAH_520 at Isaiah_520 on Twitter. And of course, the O&B Puckcast is on so many formats. But if you would be so kind to rate and subscribe the O&B Puckcast on the platform of your choice, iTunes is really preferred, but we understand people do not have Apple products in many cases. And, of course, we have our own YouTube channel. You just look for the O&B Puckcast if you like YouTube. And, of course, we're on Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and we got Google Play, a whole bunch of them. So rate and subscribe. We appreciate it. And with that, this has been a heck of a show. Gentlemen, thanks so much. So until next time, the O&B Puckcast will be back. And we got something special planned for that next one. Just watch our Twitter account at O&B Puck for news about that. Everybody now, take care and good night.